looks like the 2022 Electromagnetic Universe World Expo is turning out to be great with big name performers.
I'm Buddy James, your host.
The link is in the show notes below.
Let's get into the circuit.
We greatly appreciate your support. The best way to donate to us is on PayPal. Just send money directly to goldenscaling@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Thunderbolts group? You mean your own little group or what? I'm sorry.
No, I mean the entire extended plasma electromagnetic cosmology community. It's unclear as to how far our cosmology extends into the plasma physics community, and how many of them lean more in the direction of Big Bang general relativity. That isn't clear to me. It would be very interesting to do a cross study of all of the physics academia and find out how many of them agree with accretion or don't, or how many agree with Big Bang or don't. And I mean publicly, not just privately, but that actually themselves are willing to go out on a limb and say it.
What I tell people about Big Bang is that I view it as like bad physics and bad theology rolled into a package. Okay.
Correct.
I mean, there's numerous reasons for regarding Big Bang as bad physics, right? I mean, I believe Hals and Art pretty much destroyed the basis of the whole thing. It's like, there's no reason to even consider, like a Big Bang unless you have an expanding universe. I think Hals and Art killed the expanding universe idea. When you've got objects of very different redshifts, which are clearly part and parcel of the same things, so I mean, there's no way to go on with it, right? It's like, that whole line of thought is basically, it's got major problems. Now, I think there's a couple of other reasons. It's like, having all, the simplest way to look at it is having all the mass of the universe condensed to a point would be the mother of all black holes. Right? Nothing would ever bang its way out of that. That's ridiculous. By the same token, it's like, okay, so I mean, there's the physicist sitting there listening to it. Then you've got the preacher on the other side of the bench, the religious official. And like you've got a supposedly omnipotent and omniscient God who at some point, at some specific point in time, this could be like 6,000 years ago or 13 billion years ago, doesn't matter. It's the same proposition either way, So like at some definite point in time, like X number of years ago, decides, hey, it would be cool to create a universe, whereas the idea never occurred to him before then. I mean, come on.
Right. No, we agree.
It's bad theology and bad.
That's the entire foundation of the cosmic rearrangement hypothesis. That arbitrariness is not scientific.
Yeah, so it's bad physics and bad theology rolled into a package. I mean, you can't get worse.
Well, it can get worse.
And then you've got like relativity, which I believe is a bunch of BS, just like evolution, right? Albert Einstein tried to claim that gravity was some sort of a four-dimensional differential geometry thing, right? You can't start with that and believe that it could have changed very much, within the last 20 or 30, 40,000 years on our own planet. But it's an easy demonstration that it has, right? So, this was why they wanted me to talk about gravity, like at a couple of those early Thunderbolts forums, or I don't know, you wouldn't call that a forum, I'm sorry, but call that a symposium or something, right? And, my own little thing about dinosaurs and weightlifting and gravity pretty much indicates that one way or another, it's like gravity is some sort of an electrostatic thing, right? One way or another. I mean, whatever it is that creates gravity has got to be electrostatic in nature. I mean, it's not a geometry thing, And the version of that Walt Thornhill and I don't agree on a whole lot of anything, right? But it's like, that's one thing we do, is we both would like this idea of Ralph Sansbury's, the idea of gravity being oh, what's the word I want? The polarized system of electrostatic dipoles, really. Typically created by some sort of a force, right? That force could be like like a voltage drop if you're talking about like a current in a wire creating an electrostatic field, right? Or it could be just ordinary spin forces, gyroscopic forces. If you're talking about spin forces creating gravity, right? I mean, in that case, then you've got the kind of thing that you see like with that experiment with the with the flywheel and gravity. And I believe that experiment indicates that gravity is being attenuated. The thing that you see like at the Australian University. He's got like a 40-pound flywheel on the end of a rod, like with roller bearings, the end of the rod. Right. In other words, when the thing is not spinning, it's like you can't lift it up above waist. All you can do is lift one end of it up. You can't lift the whole thing off the ground easily. Whereas when you spin the thing up to like 20 or 30,000 RPM, it becomes easy to hold up overhead. They show the guy doing that. So that's interesting.
But there's a geometry to that, and the series of dipoles. That's the geometry as well. So
well, what Ralph Sansbury was saying was that, like, when an electron is at rest, then it basically is spherical. It does not represent any kind of a dipole, right? Whereas when you apply some sort of a force to an electron, then it stretches it, it makes an ellipsoid out of it. And when all of the electrons in some particular physical body, which could be a wire or it could be a planet, are made into ellipsoids, which line up the same way, right? Which are polarized, then you really do have something which sums up to what you call gravity. The math does seem to work. Have you guys seen that book of Ralph Sansbury's?
That sounds. I'd love to hear more about it because it sounds very similar to the geometry that I do myself.
Right. And the thing I like about Ralph Sansbury's thinking is that it doesn't seem to start with some sort of a search for an answer in the back of a book anywhere, right? It starts off with a very mundane kind of a study of currents and electrostatic fields, right? Which is not supposed to happen according to theory. It does happen, but it's a very small effect, right? It can be measured. And, this says that what he was doing at first was just, running a voltage across a wire, and that created an electrostatic field transverse to the wire, right? And of course, when you reversed the voltage, then, the electrostatic field reversed. And, he said that indicates that, there's no such thing in real life as a point particle, right? We've considered electrons to be point particles for the last 100 years, more or less. But anything which is physical takes up space, right? And that may not be very much space. But, it says that, like, you can compute the spaces involved, in electrons. And if you regard an electron as a small orbiting system of its own, with one central particle and at least one orbiting particle, the charges of which sum to that of an electron, right? Well, then you can compute the nature of these subtron particles. He calls them subtrons, right? And he said that, like, the computed necessary velocity of a subtron, of a sub-electron particle, would get you from here to Andromeda in a couple of seconds. Right, so you're talking about something which is moving, very, very fast compared to, certainly this thing we call the speed of light doesn't begin to compare with it. Now, Ralph Sansbury believed that light was an instantaneous force of some sort. I can't picture any kind of a force operating across intergalactic distances, right? And we do see light from other galaxies, right?
Are you on your laptop?
Yes.
Would you be able to share your screen and show us some of the things you're talking about?
Not easily in this case. This is I would have to collect a few things. It's like you just have to keep up. I can if you know somebody needs me to show this kind of stuff, I can prepare images and whatnot. But I mean, just to go out and grab those, I'm not sure where I would go.
Right.
There is that book of Ralph Sansbury's. You can find that on Amazon, right? And it's interesting stuff. The claims he makes regarding gravity are a bit more complex.
There's a direction.
I'm sorry?
There's a direction I want to take this in a different area. I just watched a podcast yesterday. Are you guys familiar with Lex Fridman's podcast?
Yeah, I watch all of them.
Okay, all right. So did you watch the one with the guy talking about reality and how it's farcical, etc.? Because he kept bringing up a geometry. Oh gosh, he said it a million times. Just one of those words. A something tope geometry. It's a multi-dimensional geometry.
Polytopes.
Yeah. And I immediately thought of your work.
Yeah.
And so I'd be interested to hear
sorry, just to interrupt for a second. Yeah, they're all talking about, it seems like every one of his guests is like going closer and closer towards talking about the geometry and what it is. You know, he's got Weinstein on there, Eric Weinstein, and he talks about his theory of the universe, and he calls it something. I'm on his Facebook as well. Geometric model, some sort of something. But anyway, yeah, what they're talking about is exactly what I'm sketching, and we already have it as a victory for us in the Thunderbolt.
That's immediately what I thought, because they're all still stuck in. He spent a good deal of the podcast saying that space-time is doomed and it's dead and it's not going anywhere and all this stuff. And I thought, well, then it's a good thing that we've already got more advanced solutions that skip right to the chase,
right.
both mathematically and philosophically.
And scientifically, geometrically, like it's crazy, yeah.
But they've got all the position because they're all on the inside, and they stay on the train because they all harken back to Einstein. They all bring it back, and they apologize for Einstein now, but they're like, oh well, he's wrong, but he was a rational thinker, and he moved the bar, and whatever we come up with has included and all this stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so I'd love to hear whether you guys talk about Ralph Stansbury or you talk about Buddy's work, because this is a EPMC podcast. I'd love to hear you guys talk about how we can cut out fake ethers to talk about the real geometries and the real particles of the real ethers. That make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now go.
Okay. So he was talking about polytopes in Lex Fridman's podcast. His guest, I forget his name. But these polytopes are the geometries that are inside of circuits. They're circuit geometries, current geometries. They are all hyperbolic, and which means that the shapes of them are not they're not straight lines. they're curved. All the polytopes and are curved, and they have arcs, and there's different varying degrees of these polytopes. And it's not just polytopes. There's a bunch more. There's hop vibrations, spinors that are connecting moment to moment interactions. There is a space-time geometry, but it's not the space-time geometry that Einstein was describing.
Right. Time crystals are not Schwarzschild related, and these discovery of these time crystals really lends a lot of credence to the quantum theorists. But here's the funny thing is that
time crystal is not even a big deal. It was theorized, but all it is an undulating or palpitating phase of matter. Like, water is a time crystal because it's constantly fluctuating between its states. It's it seems to be constantly fluctuating between its states infinitely, as far as we know, on this point. So
it's again is not related to its mass, is not related to relativity, and that's the thing, is that they're constantly breaking space-time. And I'm not even sure what they're using to prop up the paradigm at this point. I mean, honestly, it just doesn't seem to be holding any water on the micro scale. And on the macro scale, we have better models. We have plasma models. So, exactly what are they holding us up with? And it just seems to be Einstein's name at this point. It's the need to make to be cool and in that crowd, you have to include Einstein's name.
No, he Einstein, and he said, well, he didn't trash him, but he said, even Einstein admitted that that he was wrong. He proved himself wrong.
Right.
So it's like, that's a very humbling position, and that's what they always try to do, is to to falsify your claims. So, can't fault him for that either. So that's another brilliant move that he did. So I'm not a hater of anybody, but I do understand that there's cults that are built over characters and histories. Cults are built over them. The collective takes their name and props them up, and then they become Herculean in nature, and then they become a legend. And
you're not allowed then to criticize the not dogma, but the party line, essentially, because to do so, now you're doubting Einstein. But that's not really what it's about, because science isn't about someone's name. It doesn't, in all theoretical basis, it doesn't matter who Stephen Hawking is, to be honest with you. He's just not important to me. I appreciate the man was incredibly intelligent, but when people just automatically assume that Stephen Hawking's name means that it's gold, and that's just not the facts.
When you talk about Albert Einstein, it's like there's a history involved in what happened, like around 1905, 1910, right? It's like you need to understand that history in order to have a clear picture of Albert Einstein, what he was about, what relativity was about, and why anybody would have thought it was anything other than BS to begin with, right? It's sort of interesting. You've got these two papers of Paul Dunbar's, right? And you should all have copies of that one way or another. I could find that and send that to a couple of you. It's like, one was, I can't remember what they were called, right? They were about Albert Einstein and about how he became the official replacement, like for Nikola Tesla. I mean, Nikola Tesla really was sort of a sunshine Superman character of science, right, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Nikola Tesla was on the ragged edge of having free or very, very cheap energy for everybody in the whole world. right? And doing all that without copper wires, without having any sort of a transmission system that's strung out across the streets everywhere, right? And of course, J.P. Morgan, right? I mean, it's the biggest villain, one of the biggest villains in American history. He's also the guy who owned most, if not all, of the copper industry back in, late 1800s, early 1900s. He was hoping to make, fabulous sums of money, just selling copper wires. You're going to electrify the world, right? And they wanted to do that with DC current originally, right? That was shown not to be workable. But nonetheless, it's like, when the word got out about Tesla wanting to just completely electrify the world without wires, like, oh shit, that's like the mother of all, what's the word you want, disruptive technologies, right? They couldn't have that. So, I mean, they just completely.
And plus, not just that, the way that he thought, he was an inclusivist. He included everybody. He was always about the whole world. It wasn't about a country or a certain country, or
right. No, that and coming from Serbia as well. I mean, Serbia's always been sort of out there in left field somewhere, but it's like, he was going to just completely annihilate a couple of these big industries, right? I mean, he was going to make energy just free for the whole world, essentially free. And they denied him like every sort of access to money and banking facilities in the Western world, right? They just got rid of the guy, essentially deplatformed, deprogrammed, right? Canceled, right? Cancel culture in 1905. And in order to do that, they had to have somebody or something to replace him with. What do we use like for a Sunshine Superman character, in science, right? And, the first thing they heard about once that search was on was Albert Einstein and this idea of relativity. And, I think Morgan understood that was bullshit, from day one, but he figured, hey, it doesn't matter. It's our bullshit, That's really what you're dealing with. It very quickly became impossible to talk about it. You had a guy like in it was considered to be one of the best physicists of the time period of the 1920s and 30s, right? His name was Dayton Miller, okay, who apparently reran the Michelson-Morley experiments with better equipment, substantially better equipment, and at a higher altitude up on top of a mountain, right, to reduce the effect of gravitational drag from the planet. Okay, and from what I've read, the experiment did not fail, right? It indicated that there actually was an ether and that we were moving through it in a certain direction at a certain velocity. Okay, you can find this stuff online. I think there's one kind of a website called Ergon Laboratories or something like that. At any rate, that information is out there. I mean, that should have been enough by itself to get rid of relativity. Okay. There's a couple of other ways you could have gotten rid of it. It's like, this whole question of, like photons. Actually, is there such a thing as a photon? Is there such a thing as something with properties of both waves and particles? Right? And I don't believe that there is. It's like the analogy I give people would be to try to picture, Teddy Roosevelt out there on the Serengeti, with a new rifle and, some new guides and, like a base camp, right? He looks around, he sees some lion dung and some elephant dung, not that far from what, sitting there. Calls one of these new guides over and says, hey, take a look at that, see what you think. So what do you think you're seeing here? Now, there's a right and a wrong answer, right? And the right answer, if we well, Buana, it looks to me like some lions have been by here and some elephants have been by here also, right? So you've got lion dookie and elephant dookie, 40 yards apart, right? Well, I mean, obviously, that's the right answer, right? The guy keeps his job. Now, there's a wrong answer. That would be like, well, Buana, looks to me like some sort of a magical animal with properties of both elephants and lions have been by here. You understand why Teddy Roosevelt wouldn't want to hear that, right? But I mean, that's exactly what you see when you open the physics book to the page on photons, isn't it?
Well, that's that's where we are in modern day culture. But everything is, the theorists are the people who are taking over the positions, not the people who speak, not historians. They're replacing historians with theorists.
Okay, look, let me give you my own theory as to what you're seeing when you see like particle waves and particles in the same place, or evidence of waves and evidence of particles. So it probably indicates that both waves and particles are present, right? That's the simplest explanation it could possibly be. Well, you see, Ralph Sainsbury thought that light must be some sort of, since it appears to propagate instantaneously according to some experiments, he figured that light must be some kind of an instantaneous force. I don't picture a force traveling, being implemented, across galactic distances. Here's what I can picture. I can picture these subtron particles of his, which travel, at this velocity, here to Andromeda in 1 second, type velocity, 2 seconds, whatever it is. Okay, I can picture those being the particles in question, being given off by energetic processes, which could be plasma physics processes, it could be, like a flashlight or whatever, right? And crossing, I could picture those kinds of particles getting from some distant galaxy to here in a few seconds, and then creating waves in the local ether when they get here, okay? So, you understand what I'm saying? I don't have any picture, no matter how much of an ether there might be, like a neutrino soup ether there might be between some distant galaxy and here, I don't picture any kind of wave making it from a distant galaxy to here. Whereas I can very easily picture, like some kind of a particle like Ralph is talking about, making it from the distant galaxy to here, and then creating the waves which move at, c once it gets here, right? Now the analogy for that would be somebody pulling targets at Quantico, or I don't know if you've ever been on like a marine shooting gallery, right? I mean, you've got like 1,000 yards, and you're practicing either just general rifle usage from maybe 400, 500, 600 yards, or snipers practicing shooting things 600 yards on out, right? But you've got two components in the sound of rifle fire. You've got like, muzzle blast, which is just the sound of the gas escaping behind the bullet, right? And that's not even going to be audible at 1,000 yards or 600 yards, so you're not going to hear that very likely. That's like this guy Hathcock claiming that he used distance as a silencer, okay? Carlos Hathcock. And, the other component to the sound of rifle fire is the sonic crack of bullets moving beyond the speed of sound, right? So that if you're hearing if you're pulling targets from behind a berm, so you're safe, right? It's like the bullet's got to travel through 100 feet worth of dirt, which you can't do, to get to you, right? But nonetheless, it's like you've got targets which stick up over all that, so that you're pulling targets for the shooters. And you're not going to hear the sound of the muzzle blast, but the sound, the sonic crack of the bullets, even at 600 yards, is going to hurt your ears. You're still going to have hearing like detectors on, right? There's a mistake you can make. If you didn't know better, you might think, well, whatever it is creating the sound that we're hearing is like, it's traveling from the rifle barrel to here at the speed of sound, right? 1,100 feet per second. No, it isn't. That's looking at something the wrong way. It's like the bullet is traveling 2,700 feet per second. What you're hearing is like, sound waves being created locally by the bullet, so that would be the same mistake that you would be making, thinking about light, right? In other words, you would be thinking that like what you're seeing is going to be some kind of a wave which has traveled at, like here to the moon in 1 second. No, I don't think so. What I think you're seeing is like, you're seeing one of these subtron particles which is moving at some insane speed, right? And then waves being created by those particles, and then waves are moving at c, right? Now, in that analogy, then you're looking at, suppose we're not talking about a machine gun or a rifle, rather, talking about a machine gun. So then the rate of fire becomes the frequency of the particular light that you're seeing. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but what did you call that?
A subtron or a subelectron particle. Like I said, I believe those particles could be given off by energetic processes and then travel across these galactic distances at a speed immensely greater than the speed that we associate with the waves of light, right?
Superluminal, that's a term I've heard. I haven't heard of this before that you're speaking of.
Right. Ralph Sensbury's book goes into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a geometry. There's a geometry that I guess I can share my screen. Okay, so this book, these books, guys. I talked with this guy. He won't do any podcasts or anything. He's really reclusive. But these books, I have all of his books. They're all incredible. This is like what you were talking about, like with lines of fields of dipoles. But these torus, he did the geometry of them, mapped them out. He calls it dark matter, genetic codes of artificially intelligent universe. That's, I think, one of his newest ones. Or artificially intelligent multiverse. It doesn't matter whether you believe in the multiverse or whatever. These books are really, really math heavy, but the other ones are just more about like the history, like the history of the vortex theory and people believing in or proof of different scientists showing these geometries. But the inside of the torus is superluminal, and the outside, there's an inside string that moves through the torus. So it's like these are birkeland currents. He's literally did the math, like extremely deep math into all the particles of birkeland currents. And yeah, so that's a good. I just wanted to point that out to you guys.
What does he have to say about multiverses?
He doesn't really have too much to say. In that book, it's more about AI. Like the purpose of humanity is to integrate into AI, which is probably true because we have to upgrade and become, spacefaring civilizations and blah 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 and yada yada and spread the seed and but yeah, I'd check out those books, guys.
Interesting stuff. Now, I'm interested in the history of language, right? And the question of the Tower of Babel. And the conclusion I come to is that, like, just a study is that a reasonable study of the history of spoken languages indicates that if the story of the Tower of Babel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. Okay. I believe that the history of spoken languages only goes back a few thousand years. I don't believe you had spoken languages 6,000 years ago. Before the flood, right? Gunnar Heinzen puts the flood back like about 3,500 years from now, prior to now, right? So, I mean, that's not very much time, right? That's the kind of thing that sort of turned me off with the Thunderbolts group. It seemed to me that it was always the case that the two or three things that I thought were most interesting of all the stuff that ever turned up you know, with these studies beginning with Immanuel Velikovsky, were going to be, you know, taboo topics with them. It was like, you know, particularly, you know, the new Mars images, you know, the images coming back over the last 30 years from the rolling probes. And then the question of telepathic communication, right? The question of history of languages, right? We actually had people on the Thunderbolts forum who believed that there were super families of languages, you know, like Nostratic, you know, something which is supposedly a common ancestor to both Indo-European and Semitic languages. I don't believe that ever existed. I think there's strong reasons for rejecting that. Proto-worlds language. If you believe that humans originated, you know, like within the last 100,000 years, you know, or that you get people who claim that there was like a bottleneck amongst modern humans, you know, like on Earth at least, and that, you know, somewhere like about 40,000, 45,000 years ago, the entire human population of the planet was shrunk down to like maybe 500 or 1,000 individuals, right? You know, if that's the case, then humans ought to all speak similar languages. You understand what I'm saying? It hasn't been very much time. You know, you look at the things which are in common between Indo-European languages, and you would think that at least there ought to be similarities, strong similarities between Indo-European and Semitic languages, right? I mean, the two groups, they're not, there's no meaningful racial difference, right? I mean, they couldn't have split up more than a few thousand years ago. You know, but there are no similarities. It's just a handful of borrowed words. That's it, right? You don't have any of the things that you have in common with Indo-European languages, right? You don't have any of those same things, you know, with Hebrew or Arabic or Syrian or any of the Semitic languages, right? So that's an interesting sort of a thing in itself, right? Now, you know, what exactly would have made, you know, telepathic communications possible 6,000 years ago, but not now? You know, the question is, why is that? I've got that one interview that I did with Greg J, which is, I'm sorry?
You asked a question, if I might answer, real quick. If you believe in the morphogenetic field, the less humans there's 100% of the field in 500 people. If there's 2 people, there's 100% of the field of the morphogenetic field. If there's 1,000 people, there's 100% in that 1,000. Now you can do this by Dunbar's number in tribes and see how tribes have to break up after, or have to create different hierarchies after 150 people or something like that. There's a Dunbar's number, or like, I forget what it is. It's like maybe 10,000 or something, or less. I don't know what the number is, but so just take that into consideration on that thought there.
No, that's interesting. I hadn't heard of that before. It's like, to my own thinking, it's like humans and other kinds of animals are probably common throughout the universe, right? It's like, you know, what I believe to be the case, the humans are probably the apex creature of bright worlds, you know, like the Earth is now, like Ganymede would have been 60,000 years ago, right? And that hominids like the Neanderthal are going to be apex creatures of dark worlds, like Earth was 60,000 years ago, right? So you could.
During the dark world, would we live under the ground and only be able to come up to the surface? Like, we would have lamps and stuff and lights, and like, I heard this theory that we built the pyramids at night one time.
The Earth was bright by that time. It's like, when I say dark, I mean dark. I mean, you know, the creatures of the purple dawn all have these same kinds of huge eyes. We don't have anything. We've got leftover creatures from the Purple Age. You know, lemurs, tarsiers, owls.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
You know, all of the hominids have the same kinds of eyes. All of the dinosaurs have the same kinds of eyes, right? But it's like when you look at these realistic Neanderthal reconstructions like Danny Vendermini's, then the first thing that jumps out at you is the eyes, right? I mean, just eyes and nasal areas much, much bigger than ours.
And if you look at the creatures in the deep sea, they have huge eyes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about like the giant squids and whatnot. Yeah, that's right. So they're down there in the depths, right? And if you want to be able to see anything at all, in that sort of an environment, then you're going to need big eyes.
And bioluminescence would probably be a thing for creatures, dark creatures.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know that the Neanderthal ever had anything that would be bioluminescent. I doubt it, right? It had a 6-inch fur coat. But, the pictures, you see, that's another kind of a thing. The science journals and whatnot are just totally off base on, they normally present the Neanderthal as if he was just a slightly different human, and that's just very far from reality. The Neanderthal was just basically a very advanced bipedal ape with dark world eyes, and a fur coat, right? I mean, early human needles are common, and nobody's ever found the first Neanderthal needle because a creature with a 6-inch fur coat doesn't require needles. See what I'm saying? It doesn't require sewing machines or anything like that at all.
Oh, right.
Right.
I'm sure there was patchwork.
Right. And Neanderthal was a very different sort of a creature. That's one aspect of this book of mine and Troy McLaughlin's, right? It's like, just the difference between humans and hominids. We're completely, related by like similar design, right? That's the only relationship there is between humans and hominids. We're not descended from hominids who never interbred with them. That's rubbish.
Do you know if the Rh negative is part of the Neanderthal?
No, if there was anything like that, if there was anything to be made out of this question of Rh negative or positive, it's going to be the difference between Cro-Magnon man and the people descended from Adam and Noah. Those are the two major divides that I see. I don't see human racial groups as being worth worrying about. It's like very, even today, it's like there's said to be very little genetic variation in the whole human race. It's like, less than the whole human race than in a typical group of 50 African monkeys of the same species, right? So, color and skin features and whatnot don't really tell you very much. What tells you something is like culture and technology. Okay, you've got these two groups. It's funny. It's like the Bible is a history. It's a family album. A family album, right? And the family, and the family starts with Adam and Eve and this group of people that you had. These first antediluvians, right? I call them Bible antediluvians. And there were leftover Cro-Magnon people walking around at that same time, right? Nonetheless, the family, the leftover Cro-Magnons simply were not part of the family, right? So it's like, the Bible doesn't mention them specifically. You have to. Their existence can be inferred, right, by reading between the lines just the littlest bit. Like where does his wife of Cain's come from, right? Who are these people that Cain is worried might kill him when supposedly he and Adam and Eve are the only 3 humans on the planet? You understand the problem, right? Now you could say, well, and you will get people saying this. You get preachers who want to know better. You get, Bible purists who will claim, well, Adam and Eve went on and had more children, right? And those children had to be somehow or other informed not to mess with Cain, right? Well, that's ridiculous. God could have simply told Adam and Eve to tell any other children they might have, to leave Cain alone, right? That's not hard.
Well, God works in mysterious ways, though. Also.
Yeah, right. But nonetheless, like I say, you've got leftover Cro-Magnon people. You've got what I would consider to be Cro-Magnon descendants today, which is going to include like native Australians, which would include like the Basque people, the Canary Islands, right? A certain number of Northern European groups, the Japanese Ainu, most likely, probably most Native Americans, right? Probably descended from Cro-Magnon people, leftover Cro-Magnons, right? And you've got like other groups, right? Now, how are you going to get different groups on the Earth, right? Well, you might have groups being transferred from other inhabited bodies to the Earth before the flood or before this, the big disaster, which, is like the end of the megafauna 14,000 years ago. This would be this final capture of the southern part of the system. The Saturn, Neptune, Mars, Earth group. These things flew into the plane of this. Where does this 26-degree angle come from? That's part of the Ganymede hypothesis. The southern group flew into the plane of the Sun-Jupiter system from the south at a 26-degree angle. And as the individual bodies began to peel out and orbit the way they do now, ordinary gyroscopic force caused them to retain that 26-degree angle of approach in the form of axis tilts. That's why you get these four bodies having this roughly 26-degree axis tilt, like 23 to 28, something like that, right? That's an anomaly, right? Like I said, you would normally expect, given any sort of a theory of how solar systems form up, including mine, you would expect to see the axis, the spin axes of the bodies should be roughly perpendicular to the plane of the system, but they aren't, right? You've got the Sun and Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus that all have axis tilts less than 10 degrees. That's, you have to assume, is an original system. You've got Jupiter and Venus have the same axis tilt. If you measure axis tilt, if you regard axis tilt as being the difference from the angular distance from perpendicular, well then Jupiter and Venus have the same axis tilt as less than a half degree apart, right? It's about 3 degrees. Okay, so this tells me that that Velikovsky was right originally. That Venus was ejected from Jupiter, not Saturn, right? I mean, I really think that the Thunderbolts group has basically just dropped the ball on that one. I'm sorry?
Do you think that the accretion disks or the disks around Saturn can, once they get a certain distance away or something disrupts them or something, it can turn into a planet?
No. I've no use whatsoever for the accretion theory. It's like, planets and stars.
Not accretion, but do you think that the disk itself can become a planet? And that's how planets form and rings.
You got two ways that rocky bodies like Earth and Mars could form. They could either form as part of a Herbig-Haro object or string directly, or they could be ejected from a dwarf star or a gas giant planet. Right? Now,
do you think we're on a Herbig-Haro?
I believe our system originally formed as a single Herbig-Haro object. Okay? And that object included, this gets rid of this problem of distance and time. In other words, Eduardo Cardona tried to claim that, that you originally had a Saturnian system which started off living out there in one of these satellite galaxies and then found its way into our system and found its way, into the neighborhood of the sun. And that just doesn't work. Okay? So, I mean, the amount of time it would take for anything to get from one of the satellite galaxies to here, I mean, the Earth just system hasn't been here that long, right? You got to understand that it's not like you could be, it's not like you say, well, gee, I'm tired of living over here in the satellite galaxy, so I'm going to turn this, I'm going to put my foot way down on the gas pedal, right? And we're going to we're going to move it like, as fast as we need to. No, because you can't be, if you're going to get captured by the sun, then you can't be moving any faster than the escape velocity of the sun. Okay, and that says that even trying to get here from Alpha Centauri would take tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, right? It'd be a very slow process. And if you're going to try to get here from, thousands of light years away or from another galaxy altogether, even if it's a satellite galaxy, there just isn't time for that. You understand what I'm saying? So that doesn't work now. If you were to start something like Saturn off in the neighborhood of Alpha Centauri, say, or something further away than Alpha Centauri, maybe one of the other nearest stars, like, how's it going to get here to Earth? Either, well, one or two ways, right? You're going to have somebody like Ming the Merciless from Mongo is going to have to aim it precisely at the sun, at Sol, right? Or that's like if you're thinking rifles, right? If you're thinking shotguns, that's the other approach, right? Then you could picture Saturn being one body in some kind of an immense cloud of Saturn-sized objects, maybe flew by our sun, somewhere in the neighborhood of escape velocity for the sun, right? So that one of these bodies, which is Saturn, got captured, law of averages, right? But if that were the case, then this immense cloud of Saturn-sized objects would still be very easy for us to do. It would still be there. It'd be close by. It'd be very easy for our telescopes to see. I mean, our telescopes now can see Proxima Centauri, right? I don't mean to see a reflection or see, that there must be a Proxima Centauri just by some wobble in one of the two main sequence stars, right? But, you can actually see Alpha Centauri or Proxima Centauri, right, which is a dwarf star. So there's no way to picture Saturn starting off anywhere remotely close to being close to our own system, getting captured by our system, when the time isn't there and the way of getting it isn't there. Okay, so what Troy and I came up with is that you can get away from all these problems by having a whole system form up as a single Herbig-Haro string, right? Just a birkeland current goes through a region of space, and you get stars and dwarf stars, protostars forming up at these Z-pinch points, where you have Z-pinches which do have the power to agglomerate the plasma of space into solid objects, into stars, into protostars, possibly also into rocky body planets like Earth and Mars. Although you've got another possibility for the rocky bodies. The other possibility says that, as in worlds in collision, that it's possible you could have a star sitting there, or a dwarf star, which could just fission off a rocky body like Earth and Mars just to alleviate electrical stress, right? So that's what I believe is the original history of our system. You had a Herbig-Haro string. To the system north of that string, you had Jupiter, and possibly one or two smaller things which were aligned with, may have been aligned with Jupiter, right? Possibly Mercury, possibly our own moon, right? So the north of this thing looks like Jupiter mainly, okay? In the middle somewhere, you've got the sun, okay, which is the main sequence star. And then to the south of all that, somewhere, there you've got Uranus, right, which is got its own axis tilt, got its own separate little story. But then you've got these four other, you've got the southern system, right, what I call the southern system. You've got the four bodies, Saturn, Neptune, Mars, Earth, right, which are the southern system, right? Now, here's what Troy said had to have happened, more or less, right? He's correct about that. I believe it's like, the Jupiter, I don't think, was ever far enough away from the sun to keep it from being captured at some point, right? The sun eventually, just electromagnetic pull, whatever, captures Jupiter, right? And now you've got like a northern system, which is like the Sun and Jupiter plus Mercury plus, probably plus Mercury, at some very recent point plus Venus, right? In other words, I believe that Velikovsky was absolutely right in having Venus ejected from Jupiter. Okay, they've got the same axis tilts, and then you've got Venus having this retrograde spin, which is what you're going to get. It's exactly what you would predict if Venus had simply been ejected from the equatorial region of Jupiter, right? You just think gears, right? I mean, that would impart the ejected body with a reverse spin. Now, so you've got the Sun-Jupiter system in the north, and then at a more recent point, you've got the southern system. You've got a double system, right? You've got the Sun-Jupiter system, then you've got, the Saturn, Neptune, Mars, Earth thing. Neptune does have the right axis tilt to be part of the southern system. But Venus doesn't, right? But nonetheless, you still have a straight, most Herbig-Haro strings in space are reasonably straight. Okay, so this whole thing, starting from north to south, including the Sun and Jupiter, including the southern system, is all aligned on the same spin axis, more or less, right? In order to have a like an electrical water bridge form up between Earth and Ganymede, the approach of the southern system, the original approach, this original approach, right? Like when the Sun captured Jupiter, that caused the Sun to slow in its movement towards the north. This whole Herbig-Haro string was moving towards the system north originally, right? But when the Sun captured Jupiter, it slowed down. That allowed eventually this southern system to catch up with the Sun-Jupiter system, okay? And flew into a very close proximity. This original approach had to be on a straight line, right? Because you can't have this original group approaching in a spiral path and then have this electrical water bridge form up between the two. It's like there are 50 different reasons which my book, which Troy's work outlines, for believing that Ganymede would have been a perfect human world in past ages, right? It would have been a freshwater ocean world. Would have been a freshwater ocean world with anchored islands and floating bergs of pumice. Pumice is lighter than water, right? It floats, right? That explains this ultra low moment of inertia, right? The fact that Ganymede's mass is centered towards the middle, right? Centered towards the core, to an unusual extent, right? At any rate, so you've got this first approach, right? The southern system approaches the Sun-Jupiter system in a straight line. The two things on the outside of the respective systems on the edge is going to be the Earth, the largest rocky body in the southern system, and then Ganymede, which is the largest rocky body in this Sun-Jupiter system. Ganymede is just a tiny bit smaller than Mars, right? A perfectly good home world for, Mars is still inhabited now, minimally, but at any rate. So then, what you had, so you've got an electrical water bridge. This is Don Scott's idea and his addition to this whole theory, right? He said that, so I asked him, assuming you've got like the Earth and Ganymede in close proximity one to the other, right? And these are both.
I'm gonna have to rejoin you. I've got to make a couple calls and I'll come back. Bye.
Okay, so you got to. Anyway, let me just run one last little bit of this stupid thing by, guys, and then I pretty much should take off as well, right? Because, I mean, I've got things I've got to be doing this afternoon, and I kind of need to get ready for them. You had like this first approach. The southern system came up to the edge of the northern system. You have this electrical water bridge forming between the Earth and Ganymede. The the edge bodies in those two systems. You had humans and other aquatic mammals transferring from Ganymede to Earth through this electrical water bridge, right? And then you had this whole southern system recoiling, bouncing back, and it wasn't captured at this point, right? What you had was like you dropped a basketball on the floor, right? But it's going to bounce. It's not going to just land and kapow, just stay on the floor, right? It's going to bounce back. Next time it won't bounce quite as high, right? Nonetheless, when this southern system recoiled off of the northern system, it was like a train wreck, right? Where you get, you see train wrecks, you see angles. So the question is, where does this 26-degree angle come from? How did the southern system get this 26-degree angle, which ended up being the root cause of these 26-degree axis tilts that you have now, right? So at any rate, the southern system bounced off of the northern system. When you see a train wreck, what you see more often than not is cars which wanted to keep going forward, but they couldn't, right? The path forward was blocked. So you ended up moving outwards, right? And when that happened, then you ended up with this 26-degree angle. Okay, a roughly 26-degree angle. That's where it comes from. It's from that original bound side. And once you have that, then the next time that the southern system got pulled up close to the northern system, it did so on a spiral path. And that said that, when the Earth approached Jupiter at this point on this spiral path, well, it wasn't going to form up any more water bridges, between the Earth and Ganymede. What it did was get the Earth captured by Jupiter, right? So that, you had this event like 14,000 years ago, which caused the die out of the Ice Age megafauna, right? Both North America, Europe, northern Siberia, right? And, so that was, I can't remember how this happened exactly. I mean, I was looking at pictures of train wrecks, and it was like one of these aha moments. So this is what did it, right? It's, so you got a picture of the cars going out the one way and out the other way, right? And, you can see the way that happens. That says that the body, Saturn, which is down there at the bottom of all this, is going to be out. It's going to be out at a considerable angle from the original path of the whole Herbig-Haro string. And that says that's going to walk the system in on a spiral. So that says that Troy was only halfway wrong about this spiral approach, right? And I don't know whether that idea was his idea originally, or whether he inherited that from Eduardo Cardona. I think more likely he inherited that, because his other book, which is called Saturn Death Cult, talks about a spiral approach, right? Like the southern system approaching the northern system on a spiral. Like I say, I believe that's good for the second and final approach, right? I don't believe that pertains to the original approach, when you have the water bridge and the transfer of aquatic creatures from Ganymede to Earth. Okay, have you guys heard very much about the idea of humans being aquatic mammals?
I actually have thought about it most of my life. I'm very big into biology, and we're one of the only mammals on Earth that have blubber.
Okay, look, it's like, Elaine Morgan listed about 100 different characteristics that we share with the aquatic mammals. Now, with the other aquatic mammals, there's about 3 or 4 of those that strike me as being more interesting than the other 96, right? Now, let me tell you what those are. One of those says, we have voluntary control over breathing. Monkeys and apes don't, right? That's an adaptation for swimming underwater. Okay? Monkeys and apes do not have that. That's the only reason they can't teach them to speak English. Okay? They can understand English perfectly well. It's like they can teach them to use deaf signs. And at least one of the gorillas that they taught to sign like that, on several occasions, just for fun and jollies to see what would happen, took human IQ tests, and achieved scores of 75 to 90 right now. You got to understand that some whole human nations don't have, average IQ in Somalia is about 68, right? Retarded is considered to be 70, right? So you know, so that this one gorilla would have been a bit better than retarded to begin with, and then as she got used to taking these IQ tests, did a little bit better at it. You know, scores of 85 or 90, right? Maybe a little bit better than 90 at any rate. That's adequate for half the jobs in the world. Okay, like I said, it's definitely better than Somalia. So that voluntary control of breathing is one trait like that. Now another is swimming, like the human swim stroke, right? And being able to throw things overhand. Now that's a huge kind of a thing in ancient times, right? Like being able to use a javelin or even better, an atlatl. You're familiar with atlatls?
Mm-mm.
A spear thrower, right? If you've ever seen, it's exactly the same thing as a hard serve in tennis, right? I mean, you know, Roscoe Tanner or Alex, what's his name? Yeah, Roscoe Tanner, somebody like that. You know, you're looking at, you know, trading like 3.5 or 4 inches worth of wrist motion for 4 feet of racket head motion in the blink of an eye, right? That's going to send a tennis ball across the net at 120 or 140 miles an hour. Now, if instead of a tennis racket, you've got this atlatl in your hand, which is a stick with its barbed hook at the top, and then fitted into that barbed hook is like a 6-foot long thin spear, right? Then you're sending that 6-foot long spear out at 100 miles an hour. You know, you really don't want to be standing in front of that. Now that, I believe, is not going to be as accurate as a bow. It's probably more powerful, right? In other words, you know, the bow, it's like you're only using upper back muscles, right? Whereas an atlatl, if you're using it properly, using every muscle in your body, right? So that if you're trying to hit a white-tailed deer from 40 yards, then you'd rather have the bow, right? But if you're trying to kill a mammoth elephant or a woolly rhino, then you'd probably rather have the atlatl. Okay.
What does it do with us being subaqueous?
Yeah, well, that too, right? But I said the atlatl it was sort of the world's first super weapon, right? I mean, that's a big part of the reason that Neanderthals no longer rule the earth. Now, you can understand, I mean, how many edges did we have against hominids at first, right, or against any of these dangerous animals? Well, I mean, you've got a few, right? I mean, the fact that you've got prey animal population dynamics, you know, typically a group of humans can have more people than a typical Neanderthal family, right? I mean, so you always got to have numbers on the side of the humans. It's like once they domesticated dogs, then that eliminates the advantage that the hominids would have in darkness, right? Torches, right? You ever wonder why humans don't have fur?
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, actually.
Yeah, I could give you the answer, I think. Look, it's like there's one thing humans have ever done for which not having a fur coat would be an advantage. That would be using fire, particularly in open and windy areas, right? So in other words, an event which might cause a minor burn to a human could light a Neanderthal up like a torch and fry him, right? So Neanderthals had fire, but they just had to be a whole lot more careful of it than we did, than early humans did, right? I don't think there's any basic difference between Cro-Magnon people and people, you know, a lot of the people that you see walking around now, right? I mean, what I believe to be the case is that humans are sort of an archetype, right? Like humans probably exist throughout the universe wherever you have bright worlds, and they're the apex creature for bright worlds. At any rate.
So I'm wondering. My first thought on us coming out of the ocean and being, you know, maybe living more in the water, is what was that? First I said blubber.
Yeah.
Now, what would the second one be? The animals like whale. Oh, I was going to say that I don't really know of any animals that raise humans instinctually, but that's already shown that wolves will do that. Wolves will pick up a feral child. I was kind of getting at dolphins and how dolphins help women give birth instinctually.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other creature that helps women give birth instinctually.
Face-to-face sex. Okay, it's like aquatic mammals do that. It's like, land animals generally don't. Humans do that.
Dolphins do.
There's, they would have to know the possibility.
That,
like I say, Elaine Morgan listed 100 different characteristics that we share with the aquatic mammals. There are two ways you can look at Elaine Morgan's theory. You can look at it as a new version of evolution, in which case it's just another flavor of bullshit, right? Or you could look at it as a theory of human adaptation. If you look at it that way, then it's the best theory that's ever come down the road, but it's never gotten any traction in academia mainly, right? It's like, there are two reasons for that. The one reason is there's no physical evidence for it. There's no fossil evidence of any kind of an aquatic mammal on the earth that anybody's ever found, right? Or any kind of an aquatic ape. Elaine Morgan used to talk. See, I don't believe you ever had aquatic apes on Ganymede. You had aquatic humans, right? Another thing, right? It's like you've never had a body of water on Earth that was safe for humans to live in. It's like, you only need to spend 10 minutes in the ancient sea monsters section of the Smithsonian Museum to comprehend why humans don't live in water, right? And especially 40,000 years ago. Well, a whole lot of good reasons not to live in water then.
Yeah, and the Vikings that looked like dragons on the water. Vikings.
So when you ask yourself, like, what would a reasonable human home world look like? Because this place certainly doesn't qualify. What do humans need? What do you need for a reasonable home world for humans? You need a world where humans can live without any of this technology, right? Humans have only ever lived via technology on this planet, right? But you would need a place that was like warm because of lack of fur, right? It would have to be bright because of the relatively tiny eyes. Okay, humans and dolphins have the smallest relative eye sizes of advanced creatures, right? It would have to be warm, it would have to be bright, it would have to be wet because of all these aquatic adaptations. It would have to be safe. It would have to be safe both from cosmic radiation and from sea monsters. You couldn't have any sharks. You couldn't have jellyfish. You couldn't have any of this bullshit, right? Now, I believe that we could probably, if we put our minds to it, I believe, this is going to sound terrible to Greens and a lot of these people that are like, Aquarians, right? But I believe that we have the, we have the technological means to exterminate sharks now. I believe we should do that. Pure and simple. It's like, I don't believe we should tell humans.
You know how ridiculous that is?
It sounds ridiculous until you think about it a little bit.
If you know about biology and you know about apex predators, you'll know that apex predators are the ones that keep the entirety of the populations of all things in check. It falls downhill. It's a top down and a bottom up system.
Well, there's all kinds of apex predators that are no longer with us. Okay, it's like, the balance of nature doesn't miss the tyrannosaur or any of the other carnosaurs. I don't think it would miss sharks any more than that.
Yeah, but could it be possible that it was absolutely necessary in the evolution or in the grand scheme of things that dinosaurs were necessary to fertilize the soil, to birth, or to make humans? Like, if you look at it, everything is creature stacking. It's death stacked on top of death, stacked on top of death.
Yeah.
And it's all it's all to amend the soil. But what's the soil for? What's the soil ultimately for? To promote life and electricity completes the death cycle as it strikes and fruits fungi. So the whole thing is a system. So, you know, we are an apex predator. There's a lot of apex predators. If you take the apex predator out of a coral reef, if you take starfish out of a coral reef, they're an apex predator. The coral reef will become barren, or not necessarily barren. It'll become a monoculture. You'll have all of one type of system. Like in Michigan, there's this lake. Most of the lakes, if you get zebra barnacles inside the lake, it kills all the fish, destroys everything, and it becomes super clean and clear, but there's only zebra mussels left over. So it's extremely.
You'd have to think a little bit, but as far as I'm concerned, it's like, you know, sharks are the absolute ultimate trash fish of the universe. Okay, it's like, you know, they're not really edible. It's like they attack humans in water, and you know, they consume some gigantic quantity of ordinary fish, which would otherwise be available for human consumption. As far as I'm concerned, you know, we'd be better off getting rid of them. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that early humans got rid of a number of things they regarded as too dangerous to have around. That would have included hominids, because I don't picture hominids being killed off by the catastrophes at all. But they would know how to get inside caves just as well as humans would. Okay. That includes those super lizards you had in Australia. That includes a number of things. Terror birds, God knows, you know, the dire wolf, the saber-toothed cat. I don't know if any. I'm sorry.
I believe that each and every individual creature, whether it's asexual or not, is being fed by a birkeland current that's nested inside of another birkeland current that's nested inside of another birkeland current that provides the scaffolding for the the food cycle of all creatures. So
yeah,
when you
got information, what I believe to be the case is that, like, you know, the universe is controlled by information. You've got morphogenic fields and you've got currents.
Yeah.
Right? And I believe you've got this flow of information. It's like when a planet becomes capable of supporting a living world, right, then that living world somehow or other is being instantiated on that planet. I mean, you're not getting space aliens going around like Johnny Appleseed.
No.
That's a number of reasons why that doesn't work.
Yes, I think the breakdown breaks down into literally, there's a number. This is my theory. It's sonobiology. Everything is made out of sound, life out of sound. And the whole entirety of it is the what Don Scott already, I don't know if you caught my recent Thunderbolts video, but Don Scott looked at my geometry that I've been working on for 19 years, and he said it was as if you're standing inside of a birkeland current. And so I've taken this geometry and broken it down into a number system, and it's showing that there's tubes that are nested within tubes that are nested within tubes that are funneling the information in a series of torus, a forest of torus. So the entire toroidal, and it's the toroidal nature of the universe that creates the helical nature. You can't have helices without toruses. A series of toruses builds the scaffolding for helical anything.
Right.
So
this is the problem I was having. I've had a couple of emails back and forth with Don recently, and the problem I've been having is there seem to be like at least 3 competing definitions of what a birkeland current is, right?
Right.
And, yeah, I don't want to be writing a book about birkeland currents and me not know what they actually are, or somebody, you know, 5 years later say, hey, you know, this guy was full of shit. You know, it's like, that's not what a birkeland current is about. At any rate, I think I've figured
it is a Gaussian Bessel filament, Gaussian Bessel.
I know, but it's like, basically, I think the problem is more semantic and a language problem than anything else.
I believe you're right. I've been saying this for years, that we need to start classifying these currents break them down and either individually name them, because we can't call them all birkeland currents, but we know that this is how the filamental nodal universe works.
Right. So the one I'm interested in, the one version of a birkeland current which is part of my theory, is this thing that you have where you've got two currents wound around each other, and like an RNA DNA spiral, and you have these pinch points where the currents cross each other, and you get stars forming up at these pinch points, right? That's the version of it that I need some kind of a name for. So what I'm going to call that is like a birkeland current pair. I'm going to use 3 words instead of 2.
Well,
right?
no need to complexify it. It's a birkeland current usually breaks into 2 filaments. It's standard that it is 2. So that would just be complexifying it.
Well, nonetheless, yeah, that's covering all my bases. That's really what I want. Okay,
Yeah.
I just want to say, no matter what anybody ends up.
You could say double helical, because that's also another, synonym.
What I want is, like, no matter what anybody ends up believing that a birkeland current is 20 years out, I don't want anybody to have any basis to say that Ted Holden got it wrong.
Gotcha.
Right? Okay, so I want this, whatever I use for definition, I'm going to say a birkeland current pair. And that's going to be the working definition, the thing that I'm interested in, right? And this is the thing that creates a Herbig-Haro string. There's also a problem with the idea of Herbig-Haro something or other, right? Because generally, I'm the only person that's using the word string here. Whereas to me, it's what you're talking about is obviously a string of objects, not one object, right? But most people are using the term Herbig-Haro object.
Right.
The string that you see out there. Whereas to me, it's obviously a collection of things. You understand what I mean? So I'm going to go on using the term Herbig-Haro string.
100%. I like it way better than object. I mean, it's a string. Call it for what it is.
Because they are linear, and because they are, and most of them are so close to being, straight.
Yeah.
You can see the temptation to call it a single, to think of it as a single object, right? But I mean, to my way of thinking, it's obvious you look at it and you zoom in just a little bit closer, and you're seeing like a linear electromagnetic linear arrangement of stars or protostars.
Do you believe that our intelligence as a species is new in the cosmos?
I believe it's somewhere out there. There has to be a place where the first humans in the cosmos ever walked.
Right.
I don't know where that was. Okay, I've got no clue. Okay.
In the grand scheme of things, like, do you think that intelligence as our, I guess our sentience as a creature is new? Like, I mean, even if we're hundreds of thousands of years old, that's relatively new. Like, because
I don't believe that's noble. Okay, look, let me tell you what to take a look at. Okay, my easiest way would be just YouTube. Get on YouTube and go. Can you share your screen, or are you all still sharing your screen?
No, I'm not sharing anymore. Hang on a sec. Okay. All right.
Okay, we're in business now. Get to YouTube.
Yep, I'm there.
Okay. Type in Ganymede hypothesis. G-A-N-Y. G-A-N as in Nancy. G-A-N-Y. M as in mother. E-D-E. Ganymede hypothesis. Ganymede is Jupiter's largest moon. Ganymede hypothesis.
Okay.
Click.
Ganymede hypothesis. Subscribe.
Okay.
Okay. Parts 1 and 2 illustrated.
No. No, it's like, are you using a cell phone or are you?
Yeah, I'm on a cell phone.
Okay, that may still be possible, but it's like, I think in terms of computers and not cell phones. It's like, there's going to be, if I were looking at a computer, I would be seeing lines across. Let me stop sharing. Let me share my own screen and do it, okay? Why don't you quit sharing?
Okay, hang on 1 minute. All right, stop sharing. All right, gotcha.
Okay, let's change over. You know, I normally think in terms of doing computer things on computers and doing gadget things on gadgets, right? I mean, I'm much more comfortable. I've been using computers since like 1968, thereabouts. Okay, gadgets. I've, you know, I can use cell phones. I can do most things with them, right? But you know, I don't normally do web browsing on gadgets. Screen. Okay, share computer sound. Okay. Did I just share computer sound? Which is on and which is off here? Give me a moment.
Yep, take your time.
Okay. Desktop. All right, start sharing. This might work. Okay. You should see my screen now. Right?
Yep.
You should see the picture of Saturn and then Neptune. And like I said, I'm going to catch all kinds of grief from those Thunderbolt people for calling this Neptune instead of Venus, right? That's their problem, it's not mine.
Yeah.
Okay? I really believe that F. Cochran especially has blown it with this one. And I believe that the whole Thunderbolts group has blown it with this one. There's no way out of it, right? It's like,
Yeah, I think that the geometry that I work on is the geometry of the morphogenic field, but it involves Birkeland current and the Birkeland polyphase web.
okay. Keep watching for a moment. If I start page, let me tell you what it is that I'm trying to give you a look at. It's this interview that I did with Greg J. the one time, having to do with telepathic communication before the flood, before the Tower of Babel. Okay, if you can.
I'm plugging Greg J into our channel. He was gonna be on it today, but he has stuff going on.
Yeah, I've got stuff going on here too, starting like in about another hour and a half or so. So, shoot. That's ridiculous. Look, it's like.
Without the video, can you explain the Ganymede?
Let me, I'm sorry.
Without showing the video, can you explain the Ganymede hypothesis that you were saying?
Okay, the Ganymede hypothesis is not very well connected to this, right? It's like the Ganymede hypothesis is the question of humans and aquatic mammals arising on Ganymede originally within our system, right? And you've got, in fact, I mean, the idea of the Earth having been a planet of Saturn's or associated with Saturn is certainly correct, right? I mean, the Thunderbolts group did get that part of it right. If you, okay, you can see what I've got here, right?
Yeah.
You've got the state of Texas here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've got like where I live, it's going to be like the middle part of southeast Texas. Okay. Right about where my hand is like Victoria. And then move out into the Atlantic Ocean here. And let me show you what you have. If I go to the Portuguese Azores, right? I mean, nothing's working very well right now. This is Portuguese Azores out here, right? Pico Island would be about where my hand is, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Now,
That was Pico Island is the center of what you call the Mid-Atlantic Bulge, the highest point of land in the Atlantic. Okay, and at least I think that was Portuguese Azores out there. It's going to be the highest point of land in the Atlantic. It was also the middle of Pangaea. Okay, if you look at any kind of one of these visual maps of what Pangaea looked like, and then the way that it pulled apart, like Pico Island was the center of the thing. Pico Island would have been the absolute sub-Saturn point of the Earth, you know, like at the time that Pangaea existed. Okay, if you bring Pico Island more or less to the center of the globe, right? You say you're looking straight from Saturn, straight down at the center of the Earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you grab one of the corners and turn it completely around. Just water. You see, all you've got here is the Pacific Void. Now, this is exactly what I would expect, right? That says all you're seeing is an edge of Australia, and maybe an edge of, I may have been off a little bit there, right? But maybe an edge of Antarctica. You see what I'm saying? But by and large, all you've got there is, all you've got is like, all you're seeing in this picture is like 95% of the water, right? And when you have this electric water bridge between Ganymede and Earth, right, then if I'm standing here in the center of Ganymede, then this is what I would see. You see what I'm saying? So that when the humans and the dolphins and whatnot splashed down from Ganymede onto Earth, right, where would they have ended up? Well, they'd have ended up smack dab in the center of the Pacific Ocean. That would have been fine for the dolphins and the other true aquatic mammals, but the humans would have all just died. So what you had was, you had these symbiotic relationships between the aquatic mammals on Ganymede, right? And the whales and dolphins and whatnot could see that the humans weren't going to make it out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so that they basically just took the humans to the nearest large body of water that there was, which is Australia. So over here, right, the humans ended up in Australia.
Wow. So you're saying the dolphins gave birth to the people, like as we were moving through the circuit.
No, I'm saying that you ended up with humans and dolphins and other aquatic mammals, seals maybe, coming from Ganymede to Earth, and they all would have ended up somewhere out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
Now
what about a saltwater? What about, like, you know how when saltwater meets fresh water, you got brackish water? There would be some sort of brackish water from the filament.
This is before then. Look, this is
mixing with
look, it's
with the water.
That's the, you know, all Velikovsky himself said this, that according to all ancient accounts, it's like, according to all ancient accounts, the waters on the earth were not salty before the flood. Okay. And so there's no place on the earth that the salt would come from. There's no source for the salt in our oceans.
I was just,
you know, so that before the flood,
oh my God.
This is before the flood. You know, the waters of the earth were not salty at that time, so it would have been no problem. Okay. And we've got Australia over here.
So you're saying
You see what I'm
mostly came from Ganymede, and the water that came across bridge.
There was water on the Earth. There was water on the Earth before that time, right? What I'm telling you is that, like, the humans and the aquatic mammals that came across the water bridge had to splash down somewhere, and the one place on Earth they would have splashed down, most likely, is just what you're seeing right here. It's just the middle of the Pacific Void. It would be the point opposite. So the point of Pico Island would be Pico Island and Saturn are hidden by the Earth here in this picture. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, Pico Island would be pointed straight at, would be directly underneath Saturn. What we're seeing here is directly underneath all of that, right? It's like we're seeing the very bottom of the Earth, according to this Saturnian alignment. And we have this electrical water bridge forming up on the same axis as the Earth and Jupiter and Saturn and everything else, Ganymede, right? Then the one place the humans and the other aquatic mammals as well would have splashed down is here. Now the aquatic mammals, the dolphins, the whales, would have seen. They would have seen that the humans. I'm sorry.
Is this your theory? Whose theory is this?
Yeah, pretty much. Mine with a major contribution by Troy McLaughlin, right? It's like the first version of this book was called Cosmos in Collision. We were both listed as authors. The present version of the book, which is advanced since then, is basically like my name. Troy wanted to be separated from that, right? And there's a reason. It's like, you know, he believed it was interfering with his other works. At any rate, it's certainly the most interesting thing that I've ever worked on.
Yeah,
the humans would have splashed down. Humans would have splashed down right here, along with the other aquatic mammals. The other aquatic mammals would have shepherded them over to Australia, which is the nearest large body of dry land that they could see. Okay, give me a moment. Spam. Shoot.
So if this is theoretically possible, we could do it again and colonize. We could bring food with us in the water, in the circuits, and the current, in the stream, the water bridge. We could bring animals. We could bring us, and we could colonize another planet, right? But would we have to build a moon first? Would we have to 3D print a moon or build a moon? You know, that would help with the wobble.
You'd have to think about what you wanted to do. You would have to think about what you wanted to do. You have this movie made like about. You have this movie made like about 2009, right? Called Avatar.
Mm-hmm.
And the object was to go to Proxima Centauri and obtain some unobtainium, right? And take it back to Earth, right? Now, there's numerous problems with that. And one that has to do with using rocket engines. It takes more than one human lifetime to do anything like that with rocket engines, right? They were talking about using antimatter as a fuel. They don't even know if that's possible or not. Nonetheless, that will only get you to Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, in about 6 years instead of 20,000 or whatever. You know, so that's one problem. The other problem, there's another problem that says that, like, you know, humans, like you know, human bacterial life might be fatal to people on Proxima Centauri, Andorra, right? That says it contact, you know, in other words, you know, when you had Europeans first coming to the Americans, you had about a 90% die out. You had 90% of the native people of North and South America died out just from contact with the Europeans, right? Just from European germs, but they had no you know, able to deal with. Now, there's another problem. The biggest problem of all says that, you know, when you think about what it is that you want from another star system, the only thing you would really want from another star system is information. You don't want to go to another star, go to all the trouble to go to another star system to drag something physical back here with you. It's always going to be cheaper and simpler to manufacture to find or manufacture anything that you need within your own system, right?
Yeah, and you can control the other system faster than the speed of light. Therefore, control the outcomes, work with the create things, make things without even being.
What you would be interested in would be this antediluvian communication system, being able to just, you know, the only thing that you want is information. Somebody on Alpha Centauri or Pandora knows how to build a better toilet than we know how to make, knows how to make a better motorcycle engine, better tennis racket, you know. That's what you want. If you want anything at all from one of those places, that's what you want. There's got to be a faster and better way to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Work. Cutlery.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's going to be a faster and better way to get that information than to go there, right? Going there is the hardest possible way, you know, to get information from this other star system. So what you're really interested in is this antediluvian communication system, you know, what the Egyptians used to call Ka, right? And that included, I'm sorry?
Did you say Ka?
Yeah.
Okay, Ka.
That was the Egyptian version of the way that ordinary people experience this antediluvian telepathic communication system. Okay. By all accounts, that included 4 or 5 or 6 separate kinds of things, right? Included communication with other humans, possibly across distances, right? And included communication with spirits and communication with other kinds of animals, you know, relatively advanced animals. I mean, you're never going to teach a snake to speak English, right? But in a telepathic age, there's no reason why a human and a snake couldn't, you know. In fact, Plato, you don't have to depend on the Bible for that. Plato goes into a lot of detail. You know, he has a story which is called Statesman, right? And let's see, he didn't use the word story. What did he use for that? At any rate, one of Plato's dialogue systems is called Statesman. And in the Statesman, he has Socrates and an Egyptian scholar of some sort talking about, you know, the world before the flood and the ability of humans to communicate with animals before the flood, right? So you've got that. You've got the question of the spirit world, you know, communicating with the spirit world. All these things were subsumed under this thing they called Ka. Plato's dialogues, he called those things dialogues, right? The dialogue you'd be interested in would be called Statesman.
Okay.
On my own little YouTube channel, the YouTube channel is going to be called Ganymede Hypothesis. If you ever get YouTube working again, you know, just get on YouTube, just type in Ganymede Hypothesis. There's going to be a section called Greg J videos, right?
Okay.
And then that section called Greg J videos, there's going to be one which is called, you know, telepathic communication, right, or antediluvian telepathic communication. That's the thing. That's a long article. That's a long video. It's maybe an hour and 20 minutes, or something like that. But it's worth watching. Okay. That's one of the 2 or 3 things that I said. You remember I said that, like, you know, the 2 or 3 things that I thought were most interesting of all the subjects anybody wants to talk about on that Thunderbolts forum were considered taboo topics. You know, oh no, you can't talk about that stuff. You know, I mean, you got to be kidding. I mean, what else do you want me to talk about? You know, those are the 2 interesting topics.
Yeah. What are those 3 again? Mention those again, the audience.
Just 2 really. It's like the 2. One was, well, I mean, one is going to be like now is going to be Ganymede, right? Ganymede is certainly the most interesting of all the things, right? But then telepathy in past ages, the telepathic communication system before the flood, before the Tower of Babel. Okay, that would be another. The other is Mars. You know, these these rolling probe images coming back from NASA and the JPL. You've got like Baker's dozen Facebook groups are dedicated entirely to going over these Mars images, right? And that's not because Mars is a dead world or ever has been a dead world. I mean, you know, the stuff that's been coming back in these images for the last 25 years is staggering. I mean, I wouldn't know where to. Give me a second.
Yep.
Are you still seeing my screen?
Yep.
Yeah. Let me see if I can do something that doesn't seem to involve.
Can you
Doesn't seem.
Can you emphasize more of your theory about the dolphins and aqueous creatures? Because I'm wondering how the humans made. I'm wondering how the humans made it without oxygen. I know that there's oxygen inside of the tubes around the Earth. There's plasma tubes around the Earth that helicon waves move.
You may have had bubbles of air inside the water bridge, right? You may have had humans who simply were capable of holding the breath a lot longer than we are, since they're spending their lives mostly in water, right? I mean, Elaine Morgan wasn't talking about people waiting around in shallow water. She was talking about people spending most of the day in deep water, right? So, you know, it may not have been much of a problem. YouTube, boy, I mean, this is like getting nowhere here. YouTube, let's see. It's going to come back now. This is still a hose, right? If I say, barefoot. Okay, a bear like a bear in the woods, and then Fabrik, like normal European word for factory.
Okay.
So you're going to fabricate something. It's, I don't think it's just YouTube. I think it's like the whole internet. I think it could be the TISD is hosted also. Yeah. I'm going to assume, I'm getting the Skype, right? You can see my screen.
Yeah.
But, like, for some reasons, the only thing that's working is Skype. I don't know what it, you know, it just totally sucks.
Yeah, well, without references, without going into it, I'd love to hear more about where your inspiration for this idea. Oh, you talked a little bit about where your inspiration for some of this idea came from. I really like the idea of
originally.
So you think, because I've been thinking a lot lately about the geometries of the figures inside of the pyramid, and how they had sundials and all sorts of weird headdresses, and and like they were looking at the sun. They had this type of communication. Do you think that I understand that symbology and symbolism is one of the highest forms of communication, because you can really talk about what you're saying using a meme. It's mimetic, so you're looking at what you're saying, and it's saying what you're looking at. So do you think that they had this technology of the antediluvian psychic power, or like this? What do you think it comes from? Do you think it comes from the box, the little box that they held in their hand?
No, it's built in. It's like the human brain contains the equivalent of a Wi-Fi radio, Okay, it's no longer used for anything. It's like the static surface charge of the planet broke down. Okay, it's like there were two things. You had the static surface charge in past ages, and the static surface charge was doing two things that you really noticed a lot. One was gravity, right? The static surface charge was attenuating gravity. It was like it allowed for these gigantic animals that you had in past ages. I mean, a large dinosaur would be crushed by his own weight in our present gravity.
Yeah.
You know, that's an easy demonstration. So you didn't have large, you didn't have gravity. They didn't experience gravity the way we do. Okay. I mean, if Steven Spielberg had a time machine and was able to drag a large sauropod dinosaur out into the parking lot, he'd collapse in a heap and he'd suffocate, and that's all that would happen. Okay. So, I mean, that just wouldn't work at all. The whole thesis of Jurassic Park is it may be that you could bring one of these dinosaurs back, right? But he would stop growing at normal sizes. He wouldn't just keep on growing until it was like 150 feet long,
Right.
and like 200 tons or anything like that. Okay, it wouldn't happen. So one of the two things that the static surface charge did was to allow super animals. The other thing that it did was to allow telepathic communications. It allowed, the first, in fact, it's funny because the first...
The geometric view is a love is watching product. Love is watching being. Thank you for doing that. Keep your eyeballs out. Pay attention. There's a lot going down this year. Be vigilant. Be mindful. Be insightful. Be loving. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being kind. Share the love. Spread the love. Become the love. Amen.
Life for the cause. love life, live it to the fullest. Golden scaling. The largest of the atom, let's embark on this because this is the journey. The journey is life. Take hold. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. glories of God. Shout loud. Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud. Shout loud for the glories of God. Shout loud. Join us in the fight for Christ, in the fight to save lives. Surprise, submersible, so fast, the first, the last of baptism. Need to say more. Pay attention like the marrow in your bones, arrow in your back, arrow in your lungs, zero into the fact, tertiary Christian neuron synapses, and narrow entrance into eternity. I'm a courier of charismatic attitude, meters even neater, it might even be fun. Cider indeed, need nerds, you need nerds, need a virtue, need to be a reason. Feasibility to be a reason to be clean and sober, keys, open doors, signs of directions. Be the carrier of candlesticks, the man who brought you change. Every second you ride, until in your ribbon, you pivot, potential, you could be cat, could be cold, could be copycat, could be copy corpse, could be Schrodinger's best, could be micro-actor, Mackie, normal, open-minded, itsy-bitsy, freaking huge, a universal supermassive aspect of attached awareness. Aware of this all? Collaborative consumption. Are you aware of this all? Collaborative consumption. The new thing, consumption. Collaborative consumption. Get up now! Out of the boat! Drop! Where did this up? We don't got about a girl, but about a not about a goddess spirit. Get up, what's up? Get out, tap drums. It'll put up. I'm in search of, I'm in earth love, I'm in living life, I'm in living color, I'm in air drop, I'm in earth thing, I'm in earth thing, I'm in earth thing, I'm in earth thing. pale.